Well, good morning and welcome once again to Elevenses. I'm Kevin Williams of Survival Skills Rider Training, and you'll be with me for the next 30 minutes or so, I hope, as I offer you a mix of topical news, some possibly controversial views, and some better biking tips. What have we got for you in today's show? It's Wednesday the 15th of September. It's show number 172. We're going to do a fact check on the Twitter post that's going around at the moment that says the DVSA are not testing reversing on the HGV test anymore. SuperSoco have become the first e-bike manufacturer to top 1,000 UK sales. Raducanu rode a motocross bike, apparently. Guzzi has unveiled a 100-year plan for the Mondello site. Triumph's new speed triple 1200 RR is revealed, and the coroner put a fatal collision between bikes down to strong winds, which leads us neatly into today's better biking tip, which is how to deal with them. So settle yourself down with a cuppa for the next 30 minutes or so. Don't forget, you can join me here on Elevenses on Wednesdays and Sundays at 11. And as usual, if you have anything to say about any of the stories, do drop me a line. I'll try and answer them on air if I possibly can. If you've got any questions, I'll try and cover those as well. Feedback, topics for future discussion, do drop me a line, and because I always love to hear those, and any ideas are always welcome, of course. So right, okay, on with the show. First things first, there is a live webcast of the Science of Being Seen, scheduled for Wednesday the 6th of October at 8 o'clock in the evening. Now, in case you haven't heard of the Science of Being Seen, I suspect if you're a regular here, you'll know all about it by now. It's a look at the causes of the so-called SMIDSY collision, the "sorry mate, I didn't see you" accident, where drivers fail to spot motorcycles. I look at the physiological visual perception reasons that drivers don't see motorcycles, and we also look at some proactive approaches, proactive tips that riders can actually use to stay clear of these crashes. So if you're interested in that, the next presentation of that will be Wednesday, the 6th of October. I've just put the link up to follow to the booking page. I'd love to see a few more people sign up. So if you're interested in that, do pop along. Okay, so anyway, on with the news. The first thing to say is that there is a tweet which has gone viral on Facebook, amongst other places, claiming that the reversing element of the HGV driving test is being removed by the Driver and Vehicle Standards Agency, the DVSA. And it's said to be in order to make the test easier to pass, and it is claimed that it would help deal with the current shortage of lorry drivers, which is seeing some disruption in the delivery of supplies. Well, predictably, the tweet has been greeted with some "that'll go well" style derision, whilst elsewhere there's plenty of disbelief that such a move could be contemplated, because clearly HGVs do have to go backwards because they have to get to delivery bays and they reverse into them. It turns out, of course, that disbelief is the better response, because the tweet is not quite correct. Now, it's all in response to a government announcement last Friday that said that HGV driving tests will be made shorter by removing the reversing exercise element, and for vehicles with trailers, the uncoupling and recoupling exercise, and having it tested separately by a third party. Now, the important words there are third party. What's actually going to happen is that the reversing part of certain of the medium and large vehicle tests will actually be assessed by an approved truck instructor at an approved truck training school, rather than by the DVSA examiner. So in other words, it's the element will be trained rather than tested. Now, what I understand is that this was always part of the EU driving license regulation that you could make various elements of what we have as part of our driving test part of the training instead. But when the revised license regulations were put in force by the EU, the DSA, the body in charge at the time, and the Department for Transport chose to make them part of the formal test. And a cynic would say, I wouldn't possibly say this, that it was at least partly in order to justify spending a huge amount of money building the off-road multi-purpose test centres up and down the country where the Module 1 motorcycle test also takes place. So this proposal to shift the exercise to trainer facilities was actually first mooted in a consultation document. And that said, testing these manoeuvres separately to the other elements of the practical on-road test will free up examiner time to enable an additional on-road test to be added to the daily test schedule for full-time vocational driving examiners. Whilst DVSA might continue to provide this part of the test, we're keen to share the responsibility with the training industry. So does the change remove the reversing element from HGV test? Yes, it does, but it's done in much the same way that motorcycle CBTs aren't conducted by a driving examiner, but are actually signed off by an approved instructor at an approved training school. And it all validates the provisional license, of course, in the case of the CBT. So responsibility for checking the truck driver can reverse is back with the trainer. Now that allows, obviously, the DVSA to get that extra truck test in every day. Meanwhile, on the bike sales front, it's been another good month for SuperSoco. Now, I've been talking about them regularly on the show, but they've just registered 94 of their CPX models. Registrations don't quite equate to sales, but damn it. And that makes them the first electric motorcycle and scooter brand to reach 1,000 sales in the UK in a year. And they've actually achieved that feat, of course, at the end of August, which is only 2/3 of the way through the year. So there's actually 4 more months to go. Now, the brand only launched in the UK in 2017, but the growing awareness that the short-range mobility issue can be dealt with a small capacity electric motorcycle is obviously sinking home, and their sales have become a regular feature in those monthly reports from the Motorcycle Industry Association. And they are therefore the fastest growing and best selling electric 2-powered wheeler brand in the UK. Now, if I can get the photo up on screen, which might take a moment. Come on. Oh, damn it. My carousel's not working for some bizarre reason. Let me try again. Let's get rid of that. No, that's not the right one. Right, okay, I should have had a photo of their cafe racer style bike, but I seem to have lost it, so we'll skip by that at the moment. But basically what it means is, in terms of sales figures, is that SuperSoco are now bigger in the UK than Aprilia and Husqvarna. And their CEO, Richard Jordan, said, "We're obviously very pleased as a company to have reached this sales milestone after 4 years of hard work to establish the brand in the UK. But more than that, we're really excited about what it means for the electric industry as a whole. No electric powered two-wheeler brands ever sold this many units in a single year before, and it really goes to prove that the shift from petrol to electric is beginning to take hold." What I would say about this is there's still considerable skepticism from riders regarding electric motorcycles, and funnily enough, I was just reading something just yesterday on the MAG page, and there are still many who argue they wouldn't ride one because they don't sound or feel like proper motorcycles. Well, they do sound different, that's for sure, but they ride like a motorcycle, and surely that's the essence of riding a motorcycle. It's actually the getting from A to B experience, not the noise you make along the way. Anyway, hey ho, not everybody agrees with me, I know. Others say they're too slow or not powerful enough. And again, there's an element of truth in that. The Zeros don't actually get much past 100 miles an hour. Those are the bikes I tested a couple of years ago now. But how often does the average rider exceed 100 miles an hour? If you do, you won't be riding your pride and joy for very long. Either you'll get a tug from the boys in blue, or you'll bury your missile in a hedge. Our roads simply aren't built for speed. But what electric bikes do exceedingly well is accelerate, because of those electric motors producing huge torque from zero revs, and they go like rockets off the line. Even the quite modestly powered Zeros will outdrag petrol engine equivalents, and the little ones will give a bigger fueled bike a good run away from the lights too. Another complaint is that you can't own one if you live in a tower block. That was one of the statements that was made the other day. Well, of course you can. As I've mentioned before, many of the smaller scooters and smaller 125 style bikes actually have fairly light and removable batteries, which are designed specifically to be carted upstairs to a flat, because they're built for use in places like China. So you can carry them indoors quite easily, up 17 flights in the case of the person who was complaining. You just stick it in the lift along with yourself, because you're certainly not going to be walking up 17 flights, are you? And then you charge it upstairs in your flat, or you could carry it into an office at lunchtime and charge it up via a domestic 3-pin plug outlet, and it will fully charge within 3 to 4 hours. So you can even do half a day's work and have a fully charged battery at the end of it. And quite frankly, if you've got a 15 or 17,000 pound Zero, or even more for some of the other electric motorcycles, are you likely to leave it at the bottom of the steps of a tower block in the first place? I doubt it. There's a fair chance you will garage it somewhere else, and then there's a pretty good chance you may well have a power socket that you can plug it into wherever you're garaging it. It's not all problems solved, of course. I'd love a Zero, but right now they don't quite have the range I need to get to a training course, to run the training course and get home again. And I can't rely on a charger on the course because there are still far too few charging outlets around. And something I've noticed is that queues are already starting to form at motorway services as the growing number of people use EVs and hybrids on longer runs. Now, on top of that, of course, we have the ridiculous issue where we have competing infrastructures for charging. And that is completely bonkers, that you can actually roll up to an empty charger and then discover it's the wrong charger to fit your own brand of vehicle. Now imagine the frustration if you rolled into a petrol station only to find it didn't have the right nozzle for your petrol tank. It's ridiculous that it's been allowed to reach that point, frankly. But I would say, in my opinion, that the electric bikes are closer to being fully practical than possibly most riders are happy to accept at the moment. Right, so don't forget, you are watching Elevenses Wednesdays and Sundays at 11. Nearly always a live show. Just occasionally I have to do a recorded one for various purposes, but whatever I put out, it will go out at 11, and you can catch it up online at that time, or you can watch it on catch up later here or over on YouTube or on my coffee page, come to that. So put a date in your diary if you are new here. Who's looked in this morning? Nigel has just said good morning. Hello, Nigel. Nice to see you again. Now, if you're not a tennis fan, you'll probably have found it hard, even so, to escape the news of 18-year-old Emma Raducanu's win at the US Open last Saturday. But interestingly, an interview was aired on Amazon Prime. Turns out that as an 8-year-old, she was racing go-karts, and she switched to motocross when she was 10. And she said in that interview, "I'm into motorsports, but I couldn't carry on with it as my tennis career progressed, and it turned out pretty well." Well, you could put it that way. So yes, hats off to Emma for that win at the US Open. No, I did dig up a picture here, and it was the wrong picture, so it does apply to the next story, which is about Moto Guzzi. They have just unveiled plans for a new factory in a museum as part of their Road to 2121, Moto Guzzi's next 100 years. 100-year plans have a slightly unfortunate connotation, but this particular plan will create a new factory to extend Moto Guzzi's production capacity to match what they call growth in demand. Well, I hope they continue to get more bikes sold. I've always had a bit of a soft spot for Guzzis, and I wouldn't mind one myself, actually. They will build new conference facilities too that will be able to host internal and external events. Hotel and restaurant, they will be amenities that can be enjoyed by visitors to the site from all around the world. The revamp's been commissioned from a world famous US architect and designer, someone called Greg Lynn, who I have to say, my knowledge doesn't extend to architecture, but I'm sure some of you will know who he is. And the futuristic project will offer a location with open spaces, which, as I say, will be used by the public and as a meeting place for the community. The design is said to be founded on culture, design and mechanics with a strong green focus in line with contemporary trends. And what that means is environmental sustainability and the efficient use of sources. So new buildings will make use of existing structures, materials chosen to manage energy efficiently. There will be photovoltaic systems, which presumably means solar cells, solar panels, and eco-sustainable materials, which presumably means wood. They'll begin work at the end of this year, and it's expected to be finished by the first half of 2025. Now, with the big show season upon us, many manufacturers are revealing teasers of new models. One of the worst kept secrets, for example, is that there will be a 650 Kawasaki, which will be a sort of a retro along the lines of the Z900, which appeared recently. It'll be a Z650 to look like the 80s model. And Triumph had previewed their new Speed Triple 1200 RR some while ago, but pics of the bike and full specs are now available. And having a look at it, suggests that it may not be entirely to everybody's cup of tea. Let me just get the pick up on screen. That should be easy now, as I've actually got the right image up. There it is. According to Triumph, you're looking at pure elegance, performance and attitude, and apparently it combines distinctive British elegance and style with exhilarating real-world performance. The Speed Triple 1200 RR is the ultimate sports bike for the road. As stunning to look at as it is exhilarating to ride, with the highest specification ever. So a lot of words used twice there. It is quite pretty, I have to say. I do quite like it. But personally, I think it looks more like a Moto Guzzi than a Triumph. Have a look at that particular model. That's the bike from the side on, and compare and contrast with that. That is the 1100 Sport, a model that ran from 1995 to 2000. And if you forgive the Triumph's round headlight and the sort of modern cut-off rear end and seat, I think that you'll admit actually they look pretty damn similar. And obviously the engine's different and the frame's not the same either, but the general flowing lines I think are very, very similar indeed. Maybe Triumph are hoping that everybody's forgotten the intervening 20 years since the Moto Guzzi last appeared. The second point that I would make is that those low bars are going to put a lot of people off. The trademark of the Street Triple was a high-performance engine with flat bars. Okay, where now for Triumph? Well, the specs are out on the Triumph website already, rather surprisingly, and they tell us you get your trademark liquid cooled 12-valve double overhead cam inline 3, 1160 cc's, and tuned to put out a fairly remarkable 180 horsepower, which is comes up at a fairly revvy 10,750 RPM. 125 Newton meters of torque appears only just below that at 9,000. Now, it's always been the shape of the torque curve that matters when you're talking about a sort of a bike which is usable on the road. A flat torque curve tends to feel sort of punchy. It's why twins generally feel very responsive on the road. A steeply peaked torque curve, which is what four-cylinder bikes tend to produce, feels revvy. But I have to say the numbers from the ELEV that Triumph have given us actually do suggest that the engine will be a bit on the revvy side, and it will need to be revved to get the best from it. The top speed will probably be around 180 miles per hour with that kind of power available, and that may not give you the twist and go response, sort of real road riding speeds that triple owners have come to expect. Nevertheless, as the sort of top of the range model, it does get all the important bolt-on bits. You get Öhlins forks up front. They come with what's called the SEC 2.0 OBTI system, electronic rebound and damping. So at the back you get an Öhlins monoshock. Once again, it's got electronic compression and rebound damping. Stoppings handled by Brembo. It's got the usual full color TFT display and presumably LED lights in there as well. The one thing that I did happen to spot was that the website only provides you with the dry weight, 199 kilos, which equates to around about 440 pounds in old money. Now, add the tank capacity of 15.5 litres, which isn't huge, and then factor in other fluids on boards, and you can probably add another 20 kilos to that. So that makes the bike a fairly robust 480 odd pounds, not a lightweight, in other words. On the other hand, one big plus is the 1,000-mile 16k service interval, or 12 months if you get there first. The price, well, 17,950 is your starting point, and you can go a lot higher once you start adding the goodies to it. Nigel says, can't wait to swap my V7 for an electric bike. Have you seen the advert with the Eagle for the new Moto Guzzi? I think, is that the V100 Mondello? I talked about that the other day, actually, Nigel, last show, if I remember correctly. But yes, I do like the Guzzis. I always have done. Yeah, so there we go. For Triumph fans, it's the new 1200 RR. Right, okay, so moving on to the final item for today. On my news feed, the results of a coroner's investigation into a crash that claimed a rider's life in Shipton, Gloucestershire, appeared a few days ago amidst all the other fatal crash results. It's not been a good year for motorcycling, I suspect. It'll be probably sobering when we get the final figures. But it did make sense to look at the findings as we move into autumn, and I think you'll see why in just a moment. Now, what happened? Two riders were out for a ride. They were heading off through the Cotswolds on the A40 in Gloucestershire. It was March this year, and one of the bikes hit the other from behind. Tara Edwards, the 54-year-old rider who died, was on a black Honda CBF riding ahead of his companion when the second bike touched the rear wheel of the lead bike. Mr. Edwards fell and he succumbed to his injury, sadly, in hospital. So what happened? Well, the coroner's report noted that the riding conditions weren't great, with strong gusty winds on that particular day. PC Simon Edwards, who was the police accident investigator, he told the inquest the weather was fine, dry and partially overcast at 1:20 p.m. on March 21st. However, winds in the area were gusting at some strength at the time of the accident. The winds were significant. During my time at the crash scene, I noticed the winds varying from nothing at all to being very strong. As a motorcyclist myself, I know that unexpected gusts can have the effect of moving the rider offline. Generally, this is easily corrected. But in this incident, where there were no mechanical defects to either motorbike, the collision occurred when one motorcycle struck the other. This could have been for several reasons, but the most likely scenario is the strong gusting crosswind catching the motorcyclist off guard. Norman Coombs, who was the rider of the second motorbike, which was said to be a Honda CBR, he said in his statement to the policeman, they travelled about 2.5 meters apart from Mr. Edwards, and that he had noticed the wind had picked up during the journey. He stated that a strong gust of wind from his right side caused him to react in such a way that he collided with the motorbike being ridden by Mr. Edwards. The assistant coroner for Gloucestershire, Roland Woodson, stated that the medical cause of death was due to multiple hemorrhaging and injuries to lower limbs caused by a high-speed motorcycle collision. And he went on to say, I've taken this into consideration, all the evidence put before this inquest, and in particular weather, as the strong winds were a contributing factor to Mr. Edwards' death. Okay, so what can we learn from that? Well, unfortunately, we're not given much background, but I did notice the leading rider was on a CBF and the following rider was on a CBR. And given the distance that was admitted to by the surviving rider, that they were riding just 1.5 meters apart, that made me wonder whether the second rider was escorting a new rider on L plates. There are plenty of other CBF models around. Off the top of my head, I can remember a 500 and a 600, I think it was. But the Honda CBF 125 is still on sale, and it's a very, very popular starter bike. So that makes me wonder, firstly, about the wisdom of going out for a ride when the wind was gusting strongly. Although I do know that winds can change very quickly, particularly when a frontal system comes through. But what I would say is that 1.5 meters is a really inadequate following distance at any speed at all. Now, even as an experienced trainer, I wouldn't be following a novice rider that close, even if they were a complete beginner or doing a CBT. I would be sitting some distance back from the bike ahead just in case they do anything unexpected. And obviously on a windy day, pretty much anything can happen. So it only takes a very slight reduction in speed by the rider ahead. And if you're only 1.5 meters behind, then the bikes are going to be overlapping before you can even begin to react. And if either is blown off course, and if one of them was a 125, then you can anticipate that the 125 will be blown more sideways than the bigger CBR. But you have the makings of the collision, which cost one rider his life and left the other in hospital. So very sad story. But it leads me straight into my better biking element today, which is 7 tips for riding in strong winds. Now, most years we are battered by winter storms. In the autumn, we're being increasingly affected by decayed remains of Atlantic hurricanes. We've seen several come across the Atlantic, producing some rather weird weather already this month. And if they end up in the wrong place, they can produce some very, very strong gales. They're not hurricanes technically, but they can produce hurricane force winds. And even in midsummer, a thunderstorm can generate surprisingly strong, if very localized winds. And of course, it's always windier if you're near the coast or if you're high up in the hills. So here are my 7 tips. First and foremost, watch the forecast. As anything, before you do anything on the bike, plan ahead. Look to see what is happening by watching the weather forecast. It may look like a lovely morning out of the window, but as I know from my many years of riding motorcycles for a living, the most beautiful morning can turn very quickly into a gale-racked afternoon. And it may be a good plan to travel on another day or cut your riding short, to just make it a short run out rather than a long one. But if you have to ride, here are some extra tips. First things first, remove luggage if you possibly can. Take side bags and boxes off the back. Luggage on the back of the machine acts like a ruddy great sail on the bike. Top box specifically can really destabilize a motorcycle in strong winds, which is why as a courier, I used to have a box strapped to the rear seat. I very quickly discovered that the bike was a lot more stable riding in bad weather with the box immediately behind my body, whereas at least sort of partially aerodynamic than stuck out sort of half a meter behind me on a rack. And be careful using magnetic tank bags as well. Don't ask me how I know, but they can be blown clean off a petrol tank by wind coming in under a fairing, particularly and over the top of the tank. So I always tether mine with just a very simple keyring fob, one of those loops that comes out of the keyring, and that goes to a carabiner, which is actually attached to the handle on my tank bag, and that keeps it in place. Some days it does actually lift off the tank, and it's the carabiner that keeps it where it should be. Baggy clothing, rucksacks, again, things to avoid if you absolutely possibly can. A lot of people are starting to wear things like hoodies on bikes because they're armored. Well, they're flappy. There's a reason that motorcyclists tend to wear leathers. They are aerodynamic. The wind flows over the smooth surface better. If you've got loose, baggy gear, it will flap, it will create drag, and it will pull you around on top of the bike. So if you've got cinch straps on the sleeves or legs of a sort of fabric garment, do tighten them up. Don't let them flap around if you can possibly avoid it. And just like the top box I mentioned earlier, if you're carrying a passenger, get the passenger to sit close behind you so there's no big gap between you. If they're sitting right at the rear of the pillion seat, the wind will get in and it will blow them around on top of the bike, and then they will destabilize the machine underneath them. Think about your route too. Plan where you're going to ride. Try to find roads that are not so exposed. If it's a windy day, A roads are generally more sheltered than motorways, and B roads are generally more sheltered than A roads. Look for roads that are at the bottom of a hill rather than on top of it. They'll be less windy. Think about how you could perhaps change the route. If you're coming sort of southwest or southeast, try thinking about which way the wind's blowing, and maybe you can do a sort of a leg to the south and then a leg to the east or west. Might be a bit longer, but it'll put the strongest winds behind you if you plan it right. And of course, you may need a route change mid-ride. Many years ago, I can remember a dispatching job. It was one of the ones that sticks out in my mind. It was actually Christmas Eve, and I had a parcel to go up to Northampton mid-morning. And it was windy on the way up, but by the time I got up there, the wind had really, really let rip. I was struggling to stay in a single lane on the M1. Fortunately, by that time, it was pretty much empty. There wasn't much travelling as I came back at about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, 2 o'clock. Most people had already knocked off for the day. So I was sitting in the middle lane just to give me an extra lane either side for wobble room if I needed to. And one thing I do recall is I came up behind a furniture lorry which was going really slowly, and just as I came past it, it got blown onto two wheels. Fortunately away from me, but I kind of still remember the looking sideways and seeing the panic-stricken expression on the driver's face as he struggled to get this thing back on all four wheels. So I have to say that at that point, rather than attempt the M25, I came straight back through central London because it's more sheltered. And it turned out the newly opened Dartford Bridge was actually closed anyway, so I would have had to have taken a diversion to get home. But the interesting thing was, by the time I came out of London and hit the M25, the wind had dropped and it was almost a flat calm again. So on the move, look for problem areas. They do a bit of amateur forecasting. The strongest lines often blow around squall lines and thunderstorms. So if you spot a tall dark cloud with a rain shadow underneath it, that should ring alarm bells. Think about where the wind's likely to catch you too. Exposed roads, as I said, motorways are particularly bad. High bridges, I've just mentioned the Queen Elizabeth Bridge there. Any open roads generally, coastal areas, roads that run along mountain valleys are also particularly bad, as are roads that run between high buildings. Think about the issues. I'll leave you to work out some more. Once you've actually recognized that the wind is a problem, work out which way you're going to be blown. It's usually in the direction the wind is blowing, obviously enough, but there are three exceptions to this which I've encountered. When you pass a truck coming the other way, the wind will actually buffet off the front of it. So you'll be blown, if the wind's coming from your left, for example, and truck's on your right, you'll be blown towards the right. But as you get level with the nose of the cab, you'll hit the sort of wind that's been blown around the cab, and that'll blow you off in the other direction. And then as you come towards the back of the truck, then there's a slipstream which pulls you in, plus the effect of the wind blowing you across the road, which will both add up and work together, which will suck you towards the rear wheels. So there are real problems passing trucks, whether we're overtaking them or whether you encounter them coming the other way. Watch out halfway down a steep hill. You can often find that over the top of the crest it's actually surprisingly calm, but halfway down there's what's known as a back eddy, and that's where the wind suddenly reverses direction. And if you know the M20 down Raducanu Hill, it's notorious for that on a windy day. You'll get blown around all over the place as you come up to the top of the hill, and you'll go over the top and you'll think, oh, wind's dropped, and then suddenly wham, you get hit by the back eddy, and that can blow you right sideways across the road with no trouble at all. And as you pass the front of a high-rise building too, the building will actually deflect the wind and cause a sort of a spiral effect at ground level. So the high level wind will come down the front of the building, and then blow in the opposite direction at ground level. So as you pass the gaps in between high rises, the wind can change direction by 180 degrees in just a few meters. So, okay, what can we do? What are our strategies to deal with strong winds? Well, the first thing I'd say is I would tend to ride towards the side of the lane, which gives us the most room to be blown sideways. So if the wind's coming from my right, I would tend to ride to the right of the lane. If it's coming from the left, I would tend to ride to the left of the lane. But I would always keep away from high-sided vehicles and give a good clearance to those coming the other way. I also need to look out for fallen branches and general vegetable detritus as well, blown off trees. Particularly this time of year, if you get strong winds, the trees are still in full leaf, big branches can come down. Wheelie bins, watch out for those, they get blown into the road. Fences can come down, and on one occasion I was riding home in the dark actually on a particularly windy night after a dispatch job, and an entire shed that blew across the road in front of me. On the bike itself, don't hang on to the bars. You really need to keep your shoulders, elbows and wrists as loose as possible, and that means locking the knees into the petrol tank and bracing the back. It's tiring, it's very tiring to do that, but if we're holding the handlebars and using those to take our weight and trying to keep the bike stiff, straight by stiffening our arms, will only make things much worse. Don't forget counter steering. If the bike's being blown to the left by wind coming from our right, we actually need to steer towards the wind. So push right, go right into the wind. One little tip I discovered purely by accident, because I was just trying to get comfortable as I was starting to get very tired on a long ride, is that you can actually sit sideways off the seat with your knee stuck out into the wind. Your other knee will still brace you against the petrol tank, and this has the effect of actually sort of steering the bike a bit into the wind. There's various theories as to why it happens, but one explanation is that if you're sitting slightly right of center on the bike, your right arm is actually pushed onto the bar a little, so it's kind of your counter steering. You'll actually, if you try it, you'll find that it does actually help the bike steer a slightly straighter line when it wants to blow off in the other direction. So it's a little bit less effort as well, so you can go a little bit farther before you need a break. But I really can't emphasize how important it is not to ride with stiff arms. If you hang on for dear life, every time your upper body is buffeted by the wind, that's going to be fed straight back into the steering, and it will make the wobbles and weaves a lot worse. The final question, do we slow down? There's often an argument that we should slow down on windy weather because we'll feel less blown about. Well, it certainly helps if you're going directly into a headwind, but if the wind's coming from the side, it really makes no difference whatsoever to the side wind for obvious reasons. There is no headwind, it is entirely a side wind. So our speed is only contributing to our own stability. And What we have to do is find a compromise. There's a point at which, if we go too fast, we'll not be able to deal with an issue. We'll be blown off the road or potentially into another motorcycle before we can deal with it. But it's certainly possible to ride too slowly in the wind as well. The speed actually gives us straight line stability. So go too slow and the bike will start to suffer wind battery. Part of the problem, I think, is the designs of front wheels. Harleys with solid disc wheels tend to be a bit of a reputation for being unstable in crosswinds, and so did the old 80s Hondas with those banana Comstars that you may remember, the riveted up aluminium wheels. I had an XBR 500 for quite a few years, and that was an absolute pig in high winds. It felt like the wind was trying to yank the front wheel out of my hands. So riding in strong winds is not fun. We can't stop the bike being blown sideways, but there are strategies for lessening the effect and dealing with the issues. It's a bit of thinking before we set off. Finally, disclaimer: you obviously ride at your own risk and responsible for your own safety, and survival skills cannot accept for any liability incurred in connection with the use of any concepts outlined in this channel. So that's pretty much it for today. Don't forget the Science of Being Seen presentation. I've already given you the date for that. There's another one on braking into corners, which is coming in another month's time. That will be November. That one's also live for tickets if you go and have a look. So that's it for another show. Stay safe out there, and I'll be back with another 11s on Sunday coming. So.